I can see the class is just 29 people, but yeah, there are almost like 80 something, 87 people or something like that. So 4 is better, and I will let you know what I'm going to do with, what kind of work I'm going to give. So for each group. Okay, so to begin anything else you want to ask about this group formation and assignments or whatever? Are you people having a lot of assignments and quizzes and other kinds of things going on?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the one thing is that the class attendance is so low, maybe because I'm not teaching. So, I mean, it's not clear for people, it's not interesting. But other than that, I'm like wondering, like, of course, the other thing is so much of laptop, and then you are caught up. But I was also wondering how much is this continuous evaluation actually keeping you engaged otherwise that you were not attending classes. So yeah, okay, because the class attendance is like okay, thanks, Saurabh, but yeah, the class attendance doesn't tell that. So yeah, it's always a perpetual doubt that a teacher always has anyway. Yeah, one can always do better. So yeah, to come back to the class, to the discussions that we were having, we were talking about purity and pollution as one of the characteristics of caste, and how it is an essential characteristics of caste, and how, in general, the caste rituals and caste norms, caste economy, and other things generally kind of revolve around this idea of purity and pollution. I was also telling you that how purity and pollution norms are based on three categories: food, water. Second one is physical contact. Third one is commensality, which are again interrelated with each other. I was talking about sattvic food and tamasic food, and I was also telling about who teaches, who kind of can give which food, who can consume which food, who are you, who are when you're interacting with a lower caste or interacting with an upper caste, what kind of food can you donate, can you not give, can take, can you not take, and all those kinds of things. In this and also characteristics of caste, as I've again and again said, is very important to understand for us, because this is a reflection of caste as an institution of economy and not and politics, and political power and economic power is concentrated on certain castes and not given to other castes through these characteristics of caste, and therefore and based on which caste groups and individuals within those caste groups either have access to social, cultural, economic capital, or do not have access to social capital, cultural capital, or cultural or economic capital, or any kind of capital for that matter. Therefore, understanding of caste necessitates us to understand characteristics of caste. So it is not just a historical thing that we are discussing. We are also discussing in a contemporary sense, because this understanding this will help us understand caste in contemporary society, contemporary India, and the politics that plays around it, and the social and cultural capital that is unevenly distributed, which is not necessarily always seen to the naked eye, or it is not obvious, but that impacts a lot in terms of people's life chances. Okay, I hope you understand life chances, the chances that you get to kind of explore your potential, or to kind of use your potential to the best that you can. It doesn't mean that everybody has to get 100% or AS or AA, but as much as our potential is, as much as our characteristics as human beings, as human individuals are, the potentiality of it to develop and lead to certain kinds of results, okay, success, what we call success, okay, or achievement, is based on the fact that the chances that you get in life chances. And caste is an institution, because it is embedded in embedded in certain kinds of characteristics, and because it leads to certain kinds of access or in access to social capital. Okay, so that is where we kind of also have to understand that life chances Imagine your life chance if you were in some remote location in Northeast India or in Odisha or in Andhra Pradesh or anywhere else, okay, or Northern India or Southern India, wherever. And you're in Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata, or other cities, urban spaces. Within our urban spaces, again, we have differential access, right? Our life chances become different in that sense. So, similarly, it's not just about region, but it's also about class, caste, religion, gender, ethnicity. All of these things create your life chances. So your life chances is something very, very important to understand. To understand if you all who have joined IIT Guwahati or IIT as an institution across India are similarly placed because you got through this or because you were given a chance to be here. Maybe not because your life chances, your capitals are different, and that is why characteristics of caste is very, very important to understand. And we were in purity and pollution as a characteristic, and I've explained it in detail about food and commensality, and I was trying to tell how interdining was also prevented, how physical closeness and its sharing of ideas and knowledges were prevented, because I was explaining how you getting exposure to IIT increases your knowledge systems or your experiences, and maybe if nothing else, if not revolutionary, if not resistant, if not changing your own self in terms of new food habits, new patterns, at least you learn to be respectful and tolerant and knowledgeable that there is not one way of life, but there are different ways of life in India. There is no one way of eating food, but there are 30 different ways of eating food in India. Or there is no one way of celebrating a festival, like someone was giving example last time, but so many different ways of celebrating the same festival. So this is where commensality acted as a characteristics of caste, which was strictly followed, and this following of it strictly led to differential access to resources, differential material conditions, differential knowledge systems, and therefore the hierarchies of caste was maintained through that, even in food for that matter. Now, why does food become the understanding food as purity and pollution also become important to us today? Is because the entire debate that has been going on for some time and maybe in the history of India for a long time, and today it has intensified a lot in terms of what food is pure food, what food should be allowed, what food should not be allowed, and what food habits justifies violence against those people. So this is the context in which we are doing sociology of India, we are doing caste, and we need to understand the history of food, the history of the politics of caste, the politics of Brahminical patriarchy or Brahmanism. When I'm saying Brahmanism, I'm sorry talking in terms of Hinduism in whatever is claimed as one form of Hinduism, because there are debates and books and discussions, and so much has been debated throughout the history of this subcontinent that there is no one way of Hinduism as such. And that is what made this religion more dense. And I'm not saying other religions are not, but the spaces that was provided through within this led to it for gave spaces to explore more, to be dense, to be more thicker in its experiences, etc. So now if you look at food as and caste, okay, now that I have told you that there are certain kinds of food which are pure and impure, there are certain kinds of, and there were rules that some people could have those kinds of food and others cannot have. Some people will, those who cannot have when they are giving back to, some kinds of donations or what dakshina or whatever to upper caste, we'd have to give better sattvic food, though they are not themselves not allowed to kind of access those foods as such. Now that I've also told you that in terms of characteristics of caste, hereditary, fixed occupation, and hierarchy are given, ascribed status are given. Caste is hierarchical, caste has a fixed occupation, you are born into it, and you are not allowed to get out of it, and you are also kind of ascribed a status within the caste community. So that also means that you cannot have property and land, and some people can have property and land. that also means that your labor is not your labor but is owned by another caste. Okay, the caste which are allowed to have land and property, etc., and the products of your labor goes to them. These are the people who are allowed to own land and property, and also your labor within caste norms. You are supposed to, they are the judgmans, okay, which was the term that is used. I'm not getting more into it. The judgmans, if you have heard this term, the landowners, okay, they are your protectors and caregivers, etc., supposedly, okay, and you are supposed to give them service, and in return, they will protect you and they will supposedly take care of you. But if you look at the politics of labor here, the people who in the lower in hierarchy, the groups who are in lower in hierarchy, whose labor is owned by the upper caste, actually give labor, give care, they wash, they clean, they kind of create, they produce through agriculture and other kinds of things. They do manual services, they do physical services, or all kinds of things they do. Whereas you are seen as someone, not the caregivers.
येते आलीच आताच फोन आला त्यांचा येतच आहे थांबून
Yeah,
ठेव
Manoj, can you switch off your? I mean, can you? Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I hope that you are not speaking to me. Okay, it was a different language. Anyway, so you have to understand that these are the lower castes, the Sudras and the Adisudras, or the untouchable caste, provided services to the upper caste, yet we're not allowed to kind of own the means of economy as such in terms of power, wealth, and production. Now, in this process, if I ask you a question, the question that should come to your mind is that who had access to have, who had resources, who had money and everything to have sattvic food, and who did not? Allowed to, did they have the resources to actually have food with milk and ghee and vegetables, etc.? Or is it that their economic conditions within caste was such that they had to depend for nutrition, for protein, just for the access to food on certain kinds of foods that was not considered as pure? If you stretch this to today, okay, if you look at I'm just giving you an example that can be anything. Pulses, okay, dal and other kinds of things are the highest and one of the costliest food grains in terms of the market. Okay, this is also a potential kind of nutrition, especially protein, etc., that comes from dals and other kinds of, I mean, the pulses as such. Now tell me who has access to kind of have nutritious food, and who do not have access to nutritious food, and what are the other options for protein and other kinds of nutrition? We need to understand that, people and groups also food habits. It's just not a matter of experiments and other kinds of thing. It is a matter of history. The history of food will tell you that the nature and the kind of food that people had depends on many factors. Factors like experiments, that the availability, the vegetation that is there around. Is it a dry land or a coastal area or a riverside area, or it's a rainforest, rain, or it's something else? I mean, the geographical, the physical geography of that space determines food habits a lot. And therefore, also we eat certain kinds of food. The politics of colonization also determines our food habits. Like, for example, rice was not a staple food of India. In many, there's a whole literature on rice politics in India, how rice was imposed, and how things like millets and other kinds of things today, which have become organic and very valuable food, was completely erased from, or largely erased from, Indian societies and or geographical in subcontinent. So why am I elaborating this a little more is because today food politics has become a politics whereby violence is justified, whereby so much of erasure of culture is happening. Okay, because it is being attached to certain kinds of religion, certain kinds of groups, and therefore it is happening. Now in caste, you have to understand how food played its politics, and why is it that today's Dalit groups are claiming that when you say that meat eating is not in Indian or Hindu culture, it is not true. Others, as I have already said, that it's not true because of the geographical differences that we already have among upper caste also. But you have to also question that, when you say that Hinduism is related to vegetarianism, which Hindus are you talking about? Are you also somewhere telling that then Dalits are not Hindus? But today in your politics, you are trying to kind of bring them into your fold. For what reasons then? Is it a number game that you are bringing Dalits into your vote because they are large in number and you need them for voting politics? If you say that vegetarianism is a food of Hindus, or it's a better, or it was more regarded and it is supposed to be followed, I'm not even going into the politics of beef right now. We'll come to that in nationalism, okay? Because within caste also, many Dalit groups across this subcontinent did have cow meat. It was not that they did not have it, and that is why I suggested you to read the book Why I'm Not a Hindu. But just to come back to the emphasis of food and caste, in simpler terms, what I am trying to say is that the history of food is not dependent on religion alone. Religion plays a major role in determining what food you eat. But your economic conditions, your geographical conditions, your cultural conditions, that means who have you come in contact with? Who are you sharing your boundaries, borders with? Okay, who are you sharing your geographical location with? Who has come as traders and friends, and who have you gone to and brought back food? Okay, so in that sense, and more importantly, in this context of discussing characteristics of caste, one has to understand that the politics of food, the nature of food, the kind of food that people and groups eat or had eaten or had throughout history also depends on the kind of economic resources they had, the kind of context within which if they had access to money and other kinds of aspects like land, etc., to actually have what is called as a sattvic food and not depend on a tamasic food. So when a cow was dead, the Dalits were not allowed, nobody was allowed to kill a cow, definitely, okay, because of religious reason, which may be right, wrong, that's a different thing, we're not getting into it. But when a cow was dead, the Dalits, today's Dalits, the untouchables of the Sudras, okay, the people, the Adisudras who were below the line of pollution and purity and pollution, and especially the line of Varna, whatever was the line. Those people who kind the most untouchable within the caste hierarchy were made to take the cow and dispose it off. Not only that, they kind of scaled the skin of the cow and made whatever use of it in that sense to kind of thatch their roofs or make more better clothing or whatever it is, warm clothing, etc., etc. But they also had the meat of the dead cow. It was because it was the only way they got access to a huge amount of food resource, which has protein and which has other kinds of nutritious values for them, because they could not have access to, or they did not have enough resources to have milk, meat, milk, ghee, or vegetables of various kinds, etc., etc., and fruits, etc., etc., because the whole system of caste never allowed them that kind of resources. So maybe that is why also the food habits of certain caste groups are very what is termed as a tamasic food in the context of caste. And today also we have to understand that this culture was also a culture of whatever is Hinduism or whatever is Indian society or whatever is Indian religious systems, okay? And it is not just given to us in certain ways by who in quotes, and terming it is in quotes, the Muslim invaders. Okay, we got beef eating, we got meat eating because also of various reasons, including culture, etc., etc., geographical spaces, coastal areas, people will have more fish rather than other other parts of the places. Different castes will have different kinds of food habits, etc. But also economic resources which certain groups did not have or were not allowed to kind of improve on their own was also led to certain kinds of food habits. And therefore, in caste norms, in caste understanding, when Sattvic food is seen as pure food and Tamasic food is seen as impure food, and those who had Tamasic food were relatively impure or impure compared to those who had Sattvic food, one has to question the politics of food there itself, question the politics of caste also there itself. Plus, the idea was not did not end with that. It was also argued that people who had Sattvic food are calmer, cooler, more intelligent, okay, less passionate in the sense like, not passionate about their knowledge systems, but passion that in a very sexual, physiological manner, passionate, okay, less passionate, more in control, less angry, okay, and more creative. Whereas people, it was also believed that, or it was propagated that through the caste ideology, that people who had tamasic food, and especially certain kinds of tamasic food, okay, and today it is used against Muslims also in that sense, are angry, uh, arrogant, passionate, okay, no control over their physiological desires, etc., etc., and violent people. This was also an ideology that was propagated. But if you look at the history of caste, violence was used as a tool by the upper caste to dominate the lower caste. If anyone had the right to be angry and beat up and discriminate and violate and do things that are not supposed to be done by one human group to another human group, it was and as allowed to be done by the relatively higher caste to that of the lower caste. Lower caste were not allowed in caste hierarchy to use any form of violence because that means that's the end of not just themselves but also of their families and their communities. So the caste and food, caste and physical contact, caste and commensality has so much to do with the political economy of caste. Purity and pollution, as I've already explained to you, was maintained through restrictions on interdining, which helped prevent sharing of cultural and social spaces, which would be a potential threat to rigid and parochial understanding of caste. Questioning caste norms may be the outcome of intermingling, interdining, coming together and sharing culture and knowledge about each other, and therefore also maybe was prevented. So this is what is the set purity and pollutions, and you can give numerous examples of purity and pollutions, like people carrying people tying a branch of tree or a small branch of tree behind in their waist and walking so that they can sweep the road that they're walking and not leave impurity behind. Okay, the groups, Dalit groups, today's Dalit groups. Or purity and pollution, that when you are seeing upper caste coming, you just have to go down the road or away from it so that the shadow of it doesn't fall on that person, on the upper caste person. Or giving and taking of things, not touching each other, okay, not entering villages, not taking water from the common ponds, etc., etc., making you stay away from the periphery of the village because you will come in from the behind, work in the lands, contribute to the cleanliness and labor in the homes, but will go out and and live outside, way outside the villages, etc. So these are there are many ways of purity and pollution. I'm sure you must be all knowing in your own regions how it is followed. So this is about purity and pollution as a marker of caste. I will give you some time to ask questions, but I just want to make one last point here before going on to endogamy. Okay, that now think through the fact that you are born into a caste. Your caste has a status and a hierarchy which you cannot break. Your caste has an occupation which you cannot not do and break and go somewhere else. Okay, and there are food, physical contact, and commensality restrictions whereby you are said as impure or pure. You can eat certain foods and not eat certain foods, etc., 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 and you cannot touch each other and mix intermingling with each other. Now, what does these characteristics do to you in terms of economic and political power? I will leave you with this question to think about it. That do these characteristics of caste, okay, these characters, does it have an impact on the economy of caste groups and individuals within that caste groups? I will come back to this question after I finish endogamy, okay? Because what I'm trying to do with through all this is to bring you towards the economics of caste, as I have told again and again. So now the question to you is, think in your minds, try and understand how the economy of caste was an integral part of the ideology of caste. The religion, what we call as religion, religious rituals, norms, values, cultures. Now look at purity and pollution and think that how these norms and values of caste actually protected the economics of caste, protected the fact that only certain caste groups can always remain as rich upper class or middle classes and not. That means you have to look at the continuity of caste and class in a traditional caste society. Because only when you understand that class and caste were continuous, that caste and class, caste or upper caste meant upper classes, upper caste, middle caste meant upper caste classes and middle classes, lower caste meant lower classes. In a traditional caste system, you will understand that caste and class went hand in hand in a traditional caste system. This is very important to understand because I will show you how this continued even during colonial times and also in a large extent in the post-colonial times till today. There is a caste class continuum in many ways. So this is what I'm leaving you to think about. I will go to endogamy first because I want to finish that part and I'll come back to this question. Unless you have any questions, any clarifications that you want to do. Nothing? Is it clear? I mean, am I making sense?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Arjun. If you have any confusions, any contradictions that you think that the logic is not following, the logic is not right, you can always tell that also. Okay, now that we know, you can always raise your hands and ask, okay, but I'm just continuing to endogamy. Now tell me, if caste groups had certain kinds of economy based on what they were, suppose now I divide the caste groups into line of purity, which was there in the ideology of caste and the understanding of caste, and above were the upper caste and below were the lower caste. Now tell me, what is one concrete way of breaking this economic concentration? What is one concrete way of kind of leading to flow of economy from one to the other? Suppose X caste, suppose Brahmins and Kshatriyas have lot of wealth, lot of money, lot of land, okay, property, etc., gold, etc., etc., okay, and therefore also political power, okay. Now tell me, and suppose Vaishyas and suppose Vaishyas and Kshatriyas had this, and suppose lower castes such as barbers and washer people and and oil tillers and sweet vendors and then the lower than them the cattle rearers, the bonded laborers, the all of those of the blacksmith, the all those people, or the people who were guarding the funeral spaces and burial grounds, etc., or taking carcasses of animals, etc., were the ones who were not with much economy, or not or poorer in a place and did not have land, wealth, and access. Now tell me one certain way in which this can be broken. Marriage, yeah, Abhishek, right. So that is where endogamy comes in. What is endogamy? Endogamy is the caste norms did not allow marriage outside caste. So endogamy by endogamy means inside caste, that marriage within caste. So according to caste norms, you cannot marry outside your caste, outside your jati or what, outside your whatever, if you believe in Varna system, Varna. Okay. It was so rigid, and this was one of the most rigid formulations of caste in some ways, along with purity and pollution. One of the best ways to maintain purity and pollution, one of the purity of your of your family or your community, and therefore the economy of your community is also is endogamy. So if purity and pollution is the center of or is the ideology of caste in a way, endogamy was kind of a tool to kind of prevent any kind of resistance or breakage of that purity and pollution line, okay, and therefore the economic line. Endogamy means intermarriages, inside marriages within caste, not intermarriages, in marriages within caste, and we all know that. And I don't have to describe. If you are not coming from far northeast, if you are not coming from places like Nagaland and Manipur also in certain ways, but Arunachal, Nagaland, you know, Sikkim and some other places, unless you're belonging to Nepali community or Meitei community from northeast, or even Assamese groups understand it. If you are not belonging to far northeast, when I say endogamy in marriage within caste, you will automatically understand what it is. Okay. Now, how does endogamy? Why is endogamy so important to caste? And how does it help in kind of keeping up the economics of caste? Is what we will be discussing. Now, now that the concentration of wealth, okay, is in the hands of certain kinds of groups and not in others, okay, property, land, wealth, power that comes with caste groups are the basis upon which caste perpetuates, okay. You have economic power, you have political power. If you do not have economic power, you do not have political power, okay. You have religious power, you use it to suppress others and tell others that this is your fate, this is what it is. God has assigned us to kind of tell you who you are, what you should do, and why you are in this position. You should follow us. You have religious and caste power. You have economic power, so you have other powers coming to you automatically in certain ways. Okay. Now, endogamy, that means marriages within the caste, within jati, keeps such a division of property intact within caste. Okay, because caste groups own land, property, etc. Now, marriage, as if it is not within the caste, will lead to breaking up of this kind of whole land holdings, properties, etc., etc. Because with intermingling of marriage, if you allow intermarriages, intercaste marriages, then and if it is a norm, it becomes a norm, then other caste groups may also start owning land and property. One is that you don't have a purity of line in blood, because I'll come to it more in gender, but I will tell you this. One of the things is that property plays a very, very important role. Economy plays a very, very important role in why we have so much of control over women's sexuality. Okay. If rape, and come to it more in gender, but I will also bring it here because gender and caste matters a lot. Intersections of gender and caste matters a lot. I'm coming to that next. But just to give you an example, if rape is a crime or traditionally has been a crime, one has to ask questions: what kind of rapes are crime, and which kinds of rapes are not seen as crimes? Okay, and if it's a crime, then why is it when a man rapes a woman outside marriage and not within marriage? Why is the question of rape within marriage not accepted and is so hotly debated and told that women will manipulate it? The question maybe the answer lies in the fact that it is about inheritance and transfer of property, where the beauty of blood is determined by certain sexual activities, and and inheritance is kind of determined by certain sexual activities, and not and other activities, the inheritance in pure bloodline is broken. Maybe we'll come to that in gender more, but here I'll bring it up again. So therefore, in coming back to endogamy is marriage within the caste. When a man and a woman from same caste marry each other, they keep intact the purity and pollution intact. They keep the pure line intact, the lineage. I don't know if you understand lineage, but if you do not understand lineage is transfer of name and property and inheritance through the line of your parents, okay? And especially it's a male lineage in most parts of the world, except a few. And therefore, few societies, even in India, has lineage through mother's line. But lineage is your ancestors, who you belong to, and how you inherit property. So when a man and a woman marry within caste, the lineage is secured, and therefore the inheritance of property is secured. And when inheritance of property is secured, your property, wealth, etc., are kept in contact not just within your family but within your caste groups. Now, give me one example of what happens even today of when people break endogamy. Give me an example of how this characteristics of endogamy is what leads to certain kinds of typical violence against women, especially and lower castes. Murders. Okay, what kind of murders? Abhishek is writing murder, but what kind of murder? Pride, murders. Okay, what kind of murder? Name it. Anybody. You're right, Abhishek. It's murder, but what kind of murder? Have you heard of honor killings? Have you heard of families killing their daughters because they married a lower caste man or a caste lower than them? Honor killing is so common. Yes. So honor killing is not existing in today's India, and it is not a matter of villages. It is a matter of urban spaces, also metros. Just type honor killings in Delhi, honor killings in India. You will get so many honor killings that comes up in urban spaces and not just in villages. And the other side of honor killing is where you see that when a Dalit man has run away with a upper caste woman, okay, or a middle caste woman. I mean to say that when an upper caste woman or a middle caste woman marries or goes away with a lower caste man, you just not see murder of that man, and maybe the woman and also the man, would definitely the man also, but also of his entire family or his community. Houses are burnt, people are beaten up, killed, in fact, they are ostracized from the village, okay, and so much more violence comes in. So, what is the tool of caste? Tool of caste is not just discrimination. Tool of caste is not just kind of telling that you are impure and subordinating you. The best tool of caste is violence. Okay, so discrimination, subordination, and ultimately violence is the tool of caste. And therefore, given that you have economic and political power, and you have justified violence in your hand, okay, in the name of keeping sanctity of your caste and family, violence becomes a very major tool of caste to keep caste intact in that sense. And therefore, also not having economic and political power, lower caste largely subordinate to it. Plus, remember cultural hegemony, whereby you have socialized them into, or the system social, not any individual as such, but the system socializes in them into accepting their fate, accepting their conditions as fate and destiny and God given, and their own past crimes or past deeds, etc. And that's the way of life, and therefore they have accepted. So endogamy is marriages within caste and outside gotras. And I don't want to get into more complications of it. Gotras are the line in which you are born. You are born from a tree, or you belong to a snake, or you are some symbolism that each of our families and groups have. And therefore, we belong to certain like so many different, or you are from the sun or the moon and all that. So let's not get into gotra. Let's just keep it simple in terms of caste groups, okay? But you must have heard about so many cases that have come up. I don't know, your generation is a different generation from me. And but then if you look at, if you type in your in any kind of social media website, and you know, you just find there are many gotra violences also, because two people have married within the gotras. And that, so endogamy is also not about marrying within the caste, but also about marrying outside your gotra. You have to marry outside your gotra and inside your caste. Okay, that is the rule. So coming back to endogamy, once a man and a woman from different caste marry, uh, they not only break the line of purity and blood, or purity or line pure line of blood, but the real challenge is to the flow of inheritance and the ascertaining of the right to property in the right lineage through the right bloodline. Okay, within the community, within the caste, within the family, and therefore endogamy becomes very important. And the economic deprivation of the landless makes them susceptible to more violence when endogamy is broken. Okay, opposite of endogamy is exogamy. When you marry outside your caste, you are basically doing exogamy. You are going through a process of exogamy, and that is not accepted. Intermarriages would therefore threaten such monopoly of land and power, thus the strict line of purity and pollution through endogamy. So now I will get into something which is a little more complex within endogamy. It's not that complex if you reflect on our society, but it may become, I mean, you may start thinking in a, you may get a little confused. What I'm trying to now tell you is that because endogamy is a rule and is an essential rule of maintenance of purity and pollution, who bears the burden of endogamy? Listen to my question very carefully, okay? My question to you is that if endogamy is true, if endogamy is followed even today, we generally marry within our caste. Generally, things have changed, definitely. Lot more intermarriages are definitely happening. But if you look at studies and researches that have been done, these intermarriages are again within the upper castes and not outside it. That means a Brahmin may be marrying a Kshatriya may be marrying a Vaishya may be marrying a Brahmin. These are in regional levels, in like you can see on your own, the generally pure castes are marrying with each other. Very rarely, statistics shows that the number of marriages that are happening and are accepted, okay, with grumbling or resistance or whatever, but they're accepted. Very rarely these marriages are happening between the castes which are pure and that caste which were traditionally named as impure. That means very rarely the upper and the middle castes are actually marrying the lower castes, the castes which were relatively untouchable, like barber, washer people, or goldsmith, etc., etc. I mean, not gold, blacksmith, etc., etc., or sweet vendors, and the most untouchable, like the ones who are the cleaners and the carcass holders, the burial ground, because all those kinds of completely untouchable caste. Okay, so this is a reality even today. Okay, that intercaste marriages may have increased, but they are not happening between the pure, breaking the line of pollution as such. But let's not come to today. I will come to today. I'm talking of in a kind of a traditional society, because we are discussing caste in its traditional form. Imagine that endogamy is a necessity, is compulsory. Okay, endogamy keeps the line of purity intact. Endogamy sees to is that your caste property and wealth, etc., is not going into the lower caste groups, etc. Therefore, the number one rule of intercaste marriages, if it was allowed, and it, because the reality is not ideal, the reality is complex, and there were people who were breaking these things and doing things. So if that was done by a lower caste, they will be beaten up, killed, or violated, or thrown away. It is done by a upper caste man or a woman, again the things will be different. Okay, so the first rule, if you look at Manusmriti or anywhere else also, the first rule is in terms of exogamy, breaking of endogamy, is who is marrying whom, whose children are accepted more. If an upper caste man marries a lower a woman lower than his caste, I'm using a different term here. I'm not using the term lower caste. I'm using a term caste lower than them, that means a Brahmin is marrying a Kshatriya, or a Kshatriya is marrying a Vaishya, or a Brahmin is marrying a Vaishya, if the man is from upper caste and the woman is from lower caste, these marriages are not welcomed, but these marriages are accepted as better than a upper caste woman marrying a lower caste, a caste lower than them man. You understand the difference, right? Hypogamy is a upper caste man marrying a woman lower than his caste. Hypogamy, sorry. Hypogamy is where an upper caste woman is marrying a lower caste man, a caste lower than her. In these two marriages, the first marriage is accepted, the children within that marriages are given more importance, hierarchically, ritually hierarchical status, higher status than that of a woman whose children is produced from a lower caste man or caste lower than her. And when this is becoming a upper caste is marrying a lower caste woman, things may get very, very complicated. Untouchable woman, things get very, very complicated. And the other way around, upper caste woman marrying a lower caste man, untouchable man, is not tolerated. So this is how caste operates in many ways, okay? Not getting into these complexities. You don't have to remember these complexities. It is obvious to you if you belong to caste societies. I am asking you a question here. If endogamy and purity and pollution and economics of caste are related, who carries the burden of caste? Anyone? Are you understanding my question?
Can you repeat?
Okay. You understand endogamy, right? You understand purity and pollution. You understand that economics of caste is dependent on Meghalaya. Okay. You understand that economics of caste is dependent on maintenance of caste rules and regulations, right? What till now you have understood is that intermarriages are not allowed. Okay, endogamy is a must. You have to marry within your caste. Okay, because bloodline is important. Pure bloodline is important because inheritance can happen through that. Now tell me if this is true, and this is true. Okay, because endogamy is true. We marry within our caste. Okay, who is burdened with keeping up an endogamy? Who is burdened with maintenance of purity of caste?
Women?
The upper caste people,
Okay.
lower caste,
Sorry?
upper caste people only.
No, within the caste. Yes, Arjun, women. Somebody else also, Tiksha, somebody was telling women. It is, no, upper caste and lower caste both will follow. Yeah, Manaswini, women. Yes, this is so very obvious. I'll give you just examples. Women were burdened with maintenance of such boundaries of purity and pollution. How do you know that? Honor killing is one of the most important ways. But how do you also know that? Whose character is important in a family? Whose purity is important in a family? Who is who is kind of praised as a good woman? Okay, which kind of woman becomes a good woman? Which in upper caste, lower caste women always went out to work. Which kind of women were kept inside the homes and not allowed to go out? Not given education, not allowed to go out. Not that lower caste women were, both men and women were not given education. That's another story altogether. We'll come to that to understand history of social capital and cultural capital. But yes, it's right that when we have a rule of endogamy and we have a rule of purity and pollution, and when we have to maintain the burden of maintaining the purity of a lineage, purity of inheritance, it's women of the family and the community and the caste which kind of carry the burden, including that of nation. If we come to nationalism, we'll come to that. And that is exactly why in war, sexual assaults, in communal violence, sexual assaults, two nations fighting sexual assaults, or two groups fighting sexual assaults become very, very important. Why? because women carry the burden of honor of the family, the community, the caste group, the religious group, the nation also. And that is exactly what caste also did. And this is where the intersections of caste comes in with gender. And gender is very, very centrally located to caste. You may ask me the question, it's not like men were not expected to marry their own caste. Yes, men were expected to marry their own caste. But when men were allowed to have sexual license, relationships with other women, and that is why quotas existed. That is why sex workers existed. That is why temple dancers existed. Okay, and that is why Devdasi system. Have you heard of the Devdasi systems? The women dedicated to temples, lower caste women dedicated to temples for dancing. Yes, then you read about Devdasi system. Okay, Devdasis are those women who were dedicated by different lower caste. Either they were in a region like Old Puri temple had a Devdasi system which was abolished during the colonial times or later than that. Many temples across India had the Devdasi system. Okay, and some temples still continue to have it in one form or the other. Now, uh, given the fact that endogamy was a reality and purity and pollution had to be maintained, because the pure line has to be maintained within the caste so that the economics of caste is not broken. How is it that quotas existed? How is it that Devdasis existed? How it is that traditional Nach dancers existed? Okay, and more importantly, and you have to really think about it, is that in the system of caste, the lower caste women who went out to work because of their economic social conditions and because of caste rules, etc., were always susceptible to sexual violence from upper caste, were routinely violated, routinely used as concubines, and routinely used as for sexual and other kinds of services, including that in certain regions of India, the first night of marriage of a lower caste man, his wife had to sleep with the landlord or the whoever is in charge of his judgment or whatever it is. There were this kind of rituals also. So in that sense, if you think of caste purity and pollution and endogamy, you have to also think who was carrying the burden of it. And how were women carrying this burden? Their sexuality was controlled. They were not allowed to, upper caste women were not allowed to go outside, were not allowed to intermingle with men, they were not allowed to kind of, provide services and do jobs, etc., employment, whatever it was that. Whereas, and they were kept inside with kind of, gungats and other kinds of things, jananas and other kinds of things. Whereas lower caste women were not just economically compelled to go out to work, but also through recast norms and conditions, they had to provide services in upper caste houses and other forms such as kothas and temples and Nach dancers, etc. And sexual slavery was a part of the structure, including violence against them, sexual violence against them by upper castes at home and within the agricultural fields and in the villages was not seen as violence, was seen as justified assertion of upper caste men. So in that sense, this is how gender and so in that sense, lower caste women suffered caste in a different way. Upper caste women suffered caste in a different way. But the intersections of caste and gender played out in their lives so much, and therefore women's purity, women's honor, women's sexuality was integral. The maintenance of women's sexual purity was integral to a caste system and not just to a family and gender system, which is also true for nation, which is also true for religion. But that we are dealing with caste right now. I'm emphasizing on this. It's already 1 o'clock. Tomorrow I'll continue with this because I'll give you interesting examples from around the India to show how caste system and marriage were integrally related to kind of maintain economic system. I will give you the example of Tarawads in Kerala. Okay, what is a system that the Nambudiri Brahmins and the Nayar communities in Kerala followed to maintain the economics of caste? through marriages. It's a very, very interesting example. Maybe some of you know. I'll come to that. Okay, any questions, anything you can now ask, or you can ask to me tomorrow also, or write to me. Anything one you want to say? Okay, there are other caste systems out of India or Hinduism. Yeah, I mean, caste, Arjun is asking, are there other caste systems out of India or Hinduism? I don't think there is any caste system outside Hinduism, but that Hinduism had spread to other parts. Caste is also found in other places. Okay, but more importantly, caste has also influenced other religions in India. So therefore, it is not true to tell that Muslims don't have caste, or Sikhs don't have caste, or Christians don't have caste. I will come to that towards the end of it. But yes, there are different castes. Maybe for caste is followed across the world in terms of the migrations that has happened, the indentured labor that have gone out of India and out of the subcontinent, not just India, Bangladesh and other places, which also Pakistan, where Hindu population was there. And from people who went out from these spaces to other spaces continued to follow caste in different ways in different parts of the world. So yes, there are other kinds of caste systems. I mean, I will not say call it as other kinds of caste system, but different versions of the caste systems across the world, given the historical migrations that has happened from India. Outside that, there are other kinds of hierarchies, like there will be Shia, Sunni, and other kinds of differences among Muslims. There will be different kinds of churches among Christians. But what was unique about caste system was, in a way, was that caste had untouchability. Caste had caste had this whole idea of purity and pollution. Caste did not allow you to read and write, and access sacred texts, etc. No other religion in the world, even if there are divisions among them and hierarchies among them, did not have such practices. Unless it's racism. Racism was a different thing. It was not a religious thing. So yeah. Arjun, is it okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else wants to ask or tell, or disagree or whatever, or just, I mean, there's a flow of argument in what I'm saying, and it makes sense to my head. Maybe it doesn't make. You may find the logic not right, so you can always ask me these questions. I mean, that will also help me think to kind of better my arguments, or kind of think through my argument and all that. Okay, if you don't have any questions, tomorrow 1 o'clock, and please send me I have told already, and maybe please circulate, I'll also write it. By tomorrow 1 o'clock, please send me the group, by tomorrow or day after max, send me the groups, 4 in each group for assignment. Please send me the names if you can form your own groups and send me a mail, okay, telling that group, okay, you just write assignment group as the title of the mail, so that I will know, okay, that what it is about. Those who cannot, don't worry. The rest of the people who are there, I will form the group for them. So I can do that. Somebody else wrote something. I'm not getting it. Okay. Sure then. Okay. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Somebody wrote me something. I'm not getting it. It's okay. Okay. Have a good day.